ארצי לבחינות ולהערכה אנחנו מנסים למדוד גם משתנים שהם לא ממש קוגניטיביים. אבל אני מוכרחה להודות שגדלתי באסכולה שהרבה מהמחנכים והמורים שלי שיושבים פה לימדו אותי שאי אפשר למדוד את המשתנים האלה. והאמת היא, תראו, חצי לילה לא ישנתי בערך כי ניסיתי להגדיר לעצמי מהו משתנה קוגניטיבי, מהו משתנה לא קוגניטיבי. הכנסתי את עצמי ללופים, ובטוח שחוסר השינה הזה משפיע עכשיו על הביצוע במשימה הזאת שאני לא יודעת אם היא קוגניטיבית או לא קוגניטיבית, ובטוח שהוא מוריד את הביצוע, ובטוח שאי אפשר גם לעשות הבחנה בין המשתנה הזה של חוסר שעות שינה לבין הביצוע שלי עכשיו. הכותרת, כמו שאתם רואים, היא אישיות, מוטיבציה ומוכנות, והיא לא מציינת משתנים לא קוגניטיביים. כי באמת אנחנו לא מגדירים דברים על דרך השלילה, וגם קשה מאוד לעשות את ההבחנה הזאת בין קוגניטיבי ללא קוגניטיבי. וגם אפילו כשאנחנו עוסקים במשתנים אישיותיים, כי מצד אחד אנחנו תמיד מתלבטים בשאלה, משתנה אישיותי הוא יציב או לא יציב? עד כמה אנחנו יכולים לשנות אותו? בסך הכל יש מקצועות, כמו ברפואה למשל, שזאת הדוגמה שלי, שאנחנו רוצים אנשים, למשל שיש להם כושר אמפתיה, נכון? קשה להתווכח עם זה. ויהיו אנשים שיטענו, אוקיי, זאת מיומנות שנרכשת במהלך הלימודים. אבל אם היא נרכשת במהלך הלימודים, אז מה אנחנו מודדים אותה לפני הלימודים? וחוץ מזה, האם אנחנו באמת רוצים רופא אמפתיה? הרי רופא אמפתיה יכול להיות שעודף אמפתיה הוא ממש מסכן את התפקוד שלו. הוא כל כך מזדהה עם החולים, ואני יודעת שבמהלך הלימודים, ושמעתי סטודנטים שמתוודים על זה, הם בעצם מתחסנים מאמפתיה. אז מה אנחנו צריכים למדוד? אני לא יודעת. ואני מקווה קילונן, המומחה, למדידת משתנים לא קוגניטיביים יעשיר אותנו בעניין. היתרון של פט וגם המוסד שהוא עובד בו שהם בהחלט evidence based. כל דבר מבוסס על הרבה נתונים ופשוט תענוג לקרוא את זה, והאמת שמדי פעם אני נכנסת באמת לאתר של ה-ETS במטרה לגלות את הדברים החדשים שנמצאים שם, כי באמת נעשים מאמצים למדוד דברים שאנחנו רגילים להגיד שאנחנו לא יכולים למדוד אותם, וכמו שאמרתי אני לא בטוחה שאנחנו יכולים למדוד אותם. אז פט יהיה המציג הראשון שלנו, ומי שידסקס אותו זה משה זיידנר, שגם הוא פרופסור משה זיידנר וכמובן דוקטור קילונן. ומשה זיידנר, העבודה הראשונה שאני קראתי שלו דווקא עסקה בהוגנות כלפי ערבים, מחקר שהוא עשה באוניברסיטת חיפה, לגמרי לא אישיותי, חרדתי וכולי. ובנוגע לחרדה גם, רק רציתי להוסיף, שגם, שחרדה זה מקרה מאוד טוב, חרדה זה מרכז המוקד, המחקר של משה, ובחרדה במיוחד אני חושבת שקשה לעשות את ההפרדה בין התוצר שכולל גם את הרגשות, את החרדה, וגם את הביצוע, ואנחנו לא יודעים אף פעם אם מה שאנחנו מקבלים זה יותר פונקציה של זה או יותר פונקציה של זה. ולא יעזרו כל שנות המחקר, עדיין אנחנו לא יכולים לענות על השאלה הזאת, נכון? אז בית, בבקשה, הבמה שלך. The floor is yours.
Okay. So complicated with the machines and the notebook. Naomi, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Before I start, I just wanted to thank Michal and Mashi Justman for organizing the conference and for the invitation. And I have to say it's a real pleasure and it's a real honor to be here in this very special city, in this very beautiful country. And I wanted to just mention that I knew Michal from the time she was my supervisor at Educational Testing Service. And there was another famous psychologist from Israel named Daniel Kahneman, who did this study where he looked at what people were doing and their level of happiness. And what he discovered was that no matter what you were doing, whether it was going to the bowling alley, watching television, going to the coffee shop, you were happier if you were with another person. With one exception, if that other person was your boss, you were happier alone. But that was, the exception proves the rule, so to speak, and that was not true with McCall. So, I also want to mention that with Maji, I've known him for quite a while too. I knew of his work on test anxiety when he was, the prophet in his own land, and no one was listening. But, and he kept that momentum going through the very kind of highly acclaimed work on emotional intelligence, which is, he got plenty of laudits for that work. I mean, awards and so forth. But that really kind of set the path for the kinds of things that we've been doing subsequently. So I'm really happy about the organization that we had Mashi as the discussant or the commentator or whatever. There's some special technical term you had for it. Okay, so with all that, let me just say I've changed the title a little bit to broaden it slightly. And I've gotten so much pushback on this terminology, non-cognitive. It's very clear that no one likes that term. And so character skills, that's another one. This is something that's making its way around. Of course, there are a lot of objections to that one as well, but nevertheless. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story in 3 slides, and that'll be it. I'll tell you the story in 3 slides. Then I have another 67, but that's just details. The story is in the first 3. Okay, so this is the story. Education benefits individuals in society. We know that. There's lots of evidence for this. More education is causally associated with more economic growth, less unemployment, better jobs, less crime, higher civic engagement, and this is fundamental to human capital theory. Education is a good thing. And consequently, almost all countries have compulsory education. Almost all countries have publicly supported education from ages 6 to 15 or so. And interestingly, this all traces back to the city we're in the 1st century AD, and that was the high priest Joshua ben Gamla, according to the Talmud. And people had to go to school there so that the Torah was not forgotten. Now, so it was, this legacy of people going to school to learn to read has been with us, and we still are convinced that that's the purpose of schooling. And so I'm going to try to convince you that there's more to schooling than that. So we know about this educational effect, the educational benefit. What is it about education that produces these benefits of more growth, less unemployment, and so forth? Cognitive skills, certainly. Learning mathematics, learning language, learning problem solving, but other skills, the ones that are less tangible, punctuality, work ethic, getting along with others, impulse control, listening to the teacher. These are skills that schooling teaches. It's a very important point. These are skills that schooling teaches. Avoiding getting in fights. This is a skill that will serve you well throughout your lifetime. And this is something that, showing up on time. This is something very important that schooling teaches. So how does assessment fit into this picture? And think of assessment as signaling the values, the system values. The assessment tail is the one that wags the education dog. And if multiple choice mathematics and language tests are the basis for accountability, as they are, certainly in the United States, we have, we talked about this morning, value-added models. Value-added models are ones where accountability is based on the test scores of the students. The mathematics, specifically the mathematics and the language test scores of the students. That's what value-added models are all about. If that is the basis for accountability, then the system is going to emphasize those skills, of course. Now, the whole push behind the U.S. Common Core State Standards movement is to promote deeper learning, and Randy covered that very nicely in his talk yesterday, how the whole concept of what deeper learning is. And I think that for that reason, a lot of people believe that this is going to have a positive effect on the quality of education in the United States. The idea of think critically, dealing with complexity, communicating ideas, and collaborating effectively, these are goals of the Common Core State Standards. But there's a growing recognition that schools do more than teach mathematics and language. And let me give you just 4 examples here. In the upper left-hand corner is a symbol that represents a program in Singapore called 21st Century Competencies, something like that. And that's their framework, which is largely adopted from Roger Weisberg. But the key here is that right when we thought we were, at least in the United States, had it figured out about how we were going to catch up to Singapore with respect to our math scores and our reading scores, they are pushing into the next direction here with the, you can't read this, it talks about core values and then responsible decision making, relationship management, social awareness, self-management, self-awareness, to create concerned citizens, active contributors, and confident persons, and so forth. These are values that are important that the school system can bring. This program here, this is the California Office to Reform Education core. It's 7 districts, it was 10 districts, roughly 1 million students. LA Unified School District, San Francisco, Long Beach, a few others. This is significant because they received, first non-state to receive a waiver from the No Child Left Behind Act that was also mentioned this morning. No Child Left Behind was the law that put sanctions for schools that didn't, whose students didn't improve their math, again, their math and reading scores. What CORE is adding to that picture, they got a waiver so that they can do their own accountability, is non-cognitive assessments. For the first time in the United States, we're going to have non-cognitive assessments as part of an accountability system, including school climate, non-cognitive assessments, school climate. Now, of course, they can't figure out how to measure them, and that's a problem. But at least the intention is there. We'll see where that ends up. And then there's a couple of OECD programs I wanted to bring your attention to. One was just the fact PISA, the headlines, when PISA is released, December last year, they released their 2012 results. And of course, for the next 3 days in the newspaper, you saw the rankings. And I'm sure in Israel, there was coverage about where Israel ranked and where they ranked in the 2009 assessments and so forth. And that is certainly an important part of PISA. However, it's not the only part. So that's 1 volume of 6 volumes. Another volume, this one here, is called Ready to Learn: Students' Engagement, Drive, and Self-Beliefs. That is these so-called character skills. That's what that's all about. There's another one on, got another one on school effects, another one on socioeconomic status, another one on financial literacy, and so forth. So this is just the league tables, the math scores, the reading scores are just one part. And then finally, a very significant new project at OECD called Education Social Progress. And the emphasis here is on looking at social and emotional skills, well-being, and so forth. And there are plans even for looking at longitudinal growth in K through 12 in those areas. So there are things that are changing in our school system. So here's an overview. So I want to show some evidence that character skills are important, start out with that. And then I'm going to talk about what skills schools actually teach and what they should teach by looking at frameworks. And of course, there are a lot of frameworks, and that's one of the problems. There are so many frameworks. A 5-factor model is one framework that has some viability. And then I'm going to review a set of methods that we can use. I think that one of the barriers in this work has been that people are dissatisfied or don't trust the methods that we use to evaluate these character skills. And so that's been a big barrier for acceptance. And so, but we have some new ideas here, and then talk a little bit about uses and then conclusions. Okay, so which ones are important? Or why are character skills important? And here's just a few items that I wanted to remind you of or bring your attention to. And the first one is that there are a number of early childhood interventions that were designed to boost cognitive skills, to boost IQ, most often targeted for low-income groups that have historically been underserved by the education system. And Steve Barnett did a nice review of these. Heckman has done a couple of reviews on these. The finding has been that the IQ boosts that are specifically targeted are very short-lived. They typically are preschool interventions, and those last for 4 or 5 years. And then after 4 or 5 years on a controlled randomized trial, the control group catches up with the treatment group. But the other effects, the character interventions, are sustained for a much longer period of time. Another finding is a meta-analysis by Arthur Poropat, which is that assessments, very simple self-assessments and ratings by others pertaining to personality, predict grades in school as strongly as cognitive test scores do. And so this is a very sort of significant finding. They account for as much or more of the educational attainment effect as cognitive skills do. One example, this is the Bowles, Gintis, and Osborne paper that showed that of the benefits of educational attainment, greater participation in the labor market, higher earnings, and less criminal activity, only 20% of that educational benefit is accounted for by the cognitive skills that the tests measure. So the remaining is something else. They predict performance evaluations in the workforce more strongly than cognitive skills do. So this was a meta-analysis by Salgado and Torres, the correlation of 40 between personality assessments and ratings in the workplace. And that compares with a National Research Council estimate of the correlation between cognitive ability and workplace performance is only 25. And then there's a lot of correlational studies in psychology that show that personality predicts mortality, divorce, occupational attainment, life satisfaction, crime record, income level, physical health, and parenting skill. And then I just wanted to point out a couple of interesting studies, longitudinal studies that I hope make the point. The Swedish enlistment study was that 18-year-olds during a period in which 18-year-old males during a period in which registration for the military services was mandatory received both a cognitive battery and received a 30-minute interview by a clinical psychologist. And so 20 years later, when they were 38 years old to 40, the finding was that the results from the non-cognitive interview, the personality interview, that score predicted earnings, employment, and especially chronic unemployment higher and more strongly than the cognitive battery test scores did. And then the second study is Carmit Siegel's study based on the U.S. National Educational Longitudinal Study, the 1988 cohort, which was misbehavior ratings of 8th graders by two teachers, 9,000 or so 8th graders, which also showed that lower educational attainment was predicted by these ratings, and controlling for cognitive test scores and for SES, and lower earnings at age 26 and 27. And that the achievement score taken at the same time predicted earnings at age 26 and 7, but only for degree holders. So in other words, these non-cognitive measures, these personality measures, are important across the board, but they're especially important for those who do not achieve at the college degree level. And by the way, the Lindqvist investment study, the Swedish enlistment study, was based on 30-minute interview by a clinical psychologist. The NELS data, the National Education Longitudinal Study, was a very simple, ludicrously simple checklist. And this is what it looked like. It was a roster with a series of questions, 1 through 12, and the Siegel dissertation took, if either of the teachers rated yes on any of the yellow highlighted checks, then the student was coded as misbehaving. And if it was no all the way through, then student was coded as not misbehaving. And that roughly divides the students into two groups. And that simple binary variable was the predictor of educational attainment labor market outcomes some years later. The issues are: rarely completes homework, yes, no, don't know; is frequently absent, yes, no, don't know; is frequently tardy, yes, no, don't know; is consistently inattentive in class, yes, no, don't know; and is frequently disruptive. That's it. That's the measure. Okay, so that simple binary measure has this tremendous predictive power. Okay, so what should schools teach? And again, we go to this issue of lots of different language problems. This has been, this is one of the barriers. We don't know how to measure it, but we also don't know how to talk about it. There's not a common language. There is no standard. I was thinking, we have these microphones here, and I didn't bring I have a headset that I put on the plane. I could have plugged that in here. It's a standard. We have, well, we don't have, the plugs are not standard. They're standard across Israel and Europe for that matter, but we have standards all over the place. We do not have standards for the language for describing what these so-called character skills are: self-management skills, social-emotional skills, psychosocial skills, personality, emotional intelligence, 21st century skills or competency, interpersonal, and so forth. But we have many frameworks. So here are some. We have some in K-12, and I'm going to go through a few of these to get you familiarized with them. So I'm not going to read through all this. Let's see what ones I'm not going to cover. Seligman and Peterson's character skills. We have several here at ETS and College Board and Law School. This all started, a lot of this work started with the SCANS report, the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. So for those of you who are interested in the history, this is a very interesting report to consult. But I wanted to end up making kind of a pitch for the Big Five, which is a little controversial, but we'll go through this. Okay, so the National Research Council in the U.S. is a organization that gets money to put scientists together, and they try to hash out things. And they've written now 4 books on 21st century skills. The first one was on identifying future skill demands, because a lot of this is what skills should the schools teach to prepare for the new workforce. And no one can predict the future. That's one of the problems of this report, but it makes for interesting reading. The next one was about targeted science education specifically. The next one targeted assessment specifically. And then the fourth one was education for life and work. And this one, Committee on Defining Deeper Learning in 21st Century Skills. And these are all downloadable free at the National Research Council website, so you can just look up Google National Research Council 21st Century Skills, and you'll probably find all 4 of these. But one thing that they do to maybe help us a little bit with the language is that they do a crosswalk between a lot of these lists, these 21st century competencies and skills lists, but then they put them into 3 buckets. And the buckets are cognitive, interpersonal, intrapersonal. And at least that's a start. It's a useful way of thinking about things, that the competencies that we need are related to thinking, learning, problem solving, critical thinking, and so on. That's the cognitive bucket. Interpersonal is the teamwork and behavior between people. And then the intrapersonal is the self-management, controlling your emotions, being organized and hardworking and so forth. And so this is interpersonal, is the communication as well. Another framework is the Farrington et al. Framework. Another free downloadable paper. A lot of this is motivated in terms of there's research to justify these various categories, but to me the most significant aspect of this framework is that educators are talking about it. I was at a meeting at Harvard at the STP, and one of the things they did, it's strategic data projects, and one of the things they did was, I said, well, I could mention this framework, and they said, no, don't mention this framework. We're going to have a whole session on this one framework. And so that's what they did. But it's kind of nice. I think it uses language that people find very useful, and and so this has been very influential. If you look at the core activities, California Office to Reform Education, it's largely governed by these ideas. So they divide it into academic behaviors, things you can measure that are very concrete, such as going to class, doing homework. You can imagine that's relatively easy to measure. Perseverance, such as various ways of talking about persevering. And then Carolyn Dweck's academic mindsets idea, and that's the idea that sense of belonging and the attributions to effort. So this has been a very powerful idea that one way students differ is in how they attribute their successes and failures. Successful students are ones who attribute their success or their failure to lack of effort. And this has been, whereas unsuccessful students are ones who attribute to lack of ability. And the interesting thing about attributing failure to lack of ability is that it promotes sort of giving up. You say, well, I'm not a math person. I'll never learn that. So you don't try. Whereas if you attribute your failure to lack of effort, then if you have an unsuccessful experience, you say, well, I'm going to study harder next time. And so there's some suggestion based on the analysis by Stigler and Stevenson, who looked at Asian educational system compared with Western education systems. This is one of the fundamental differences between Asian and Western attitudes. In Asia, the attitude is that if you fail, it's because you didn't do your homework. In the West, you failed because you don't have that talent. So this is very fundamental to our culture, very fundamental to the way we think about things. So the academic mindsets has been very influential in that respect. And then learning strategies and social skills, including social emotional learning. Okay. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning is also a very influential framework. Why? Because Roger Weisberg, who's in charge of this, has been very active in getting state legislation. For example, Illinois has a state standard to promote academic, social, and emotional learning. The Congress in the U.S. has also a standard on the books, although it'll never pass. It's hung up. It's never going to go anywhere. But nevertheless, at least he got it on the books. And what this does is it divides the academic and social and emotional learning into social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, self-awareness, self-management. And as some of you might know, there have been a couple of very significant meta-analyses by Durlach et al. And these meta-analyses have shown that these skills can be taught in schools, and they benefit, they're related to better academic success as well as better ability to regulate yourself and be better with other people and so forth. And so this has been, and also I should mention that in the United States, one of our broadcast channels, NBC, has a social and emotional learning program on the web which gives guidance by grade level, first grade, second grade, third grade, to promote the development of skills in this area. And this has been due to this group, the Castle group. Okay, and then we're doing something in the private schools. We looked at what they wanted, and they're very interested in teamwork, creativity, ethics, resilience, curiosity, and time management. Let me mention some in higher education. There is a program that we're doing in called Success Navigator. And what it is, these are items, might not be able to read this from the back, but this is, we did a review of factors that were associated with success in higher education. And those factors are academic skills, self-management skills, social support, and commitment. Specifically, within academic skills, organization, meeting class expectations. Within self-management, sensitivity to stress, determination, academic self-efficacy, test anxiety. So we're catching up with you. Social support, connectedness, institutional support, and barriers to success. Commitment to college, and then institutional commitment. And then we have specific items. For example, connectedness, I feel connected to my peers. There are very simple self-assessments. It's a low-stakes assessment. It's used in to look at students, to identify students who are having trouble in college, so as to promote retention in college. We have another assessment called the Personal Potential Index, where we interviewed faculty members, and they identified these major categories: communication skills, teamwork, ethics, planning, resilience, knowledge, and creativity. And that's up on the web. You can look at that on the web. And then finally, in the workforce area, this is just a crosswalk between, it's kind of complicated here, but this is all based on data. The first three columns here are X's. These are three different, basically, groups who've tried to identify 21st century skills. The ATC 21S group, which was Microsoft, Intel, and Cisco, now being run out of the University of Melbourne. And they identified, through Lit Review, a number of important skills. The Feingold and Nota Bartolo Lit Review also identified from Europe a number of skills. And then the P21 group also identified some. And then what we did is we looked at the U.S. Department of Labor does surveys where people rate about 150 different skills, the importance of 150 different skills across about 900 different jobs annually. It's a big effort. And so what we did is we did a principal components analysis of that, and we identified 15 factors or so. And then we looked at the number with a dot, that's a correlation with earnings in that job. So it's a job level correlation. And the 1 through 15 rating there is a ranking of importance across a number of things. And so what the finding here is that critical thinking, problem solving, communicate, the ones in green are the top 5 levels, categories. The ones in yellow are the next 5, and the number 1 in orange is next 5 after that. But it's an attempt to try to look at all these disparate lists and organizations and say, what are they commonly saying? Okay. And then I just wanted to review a couple of surveys. This is what employers who were asked, what skills are you looking for when you hire? 98% of the employers said communication skills. And the next question is, what skills are hardest to find but most important to you? Very high percentage also, communication skills. Another important skill identified was positive attitude. Another one was kind of flexibility, adaptable to change. Another one was teamwork skills. So this is gives a sense for what's the most valued skills. And another survey, oral communications, teamwork, professionalism, work ethic, written communications, and you can see a much smaller percentage said they said that mathematics and science were very important. Now, you can argue about what that means exactly, but the real point is that across a wide variety of jobs, oral communications, teamwork, written communications, and work ethic and so forth are rated highly. That's the key takeaway here. Okay, the Big Five is a unifying framework. I don't want to go into all the gory details of the history of the Big Five. I just want to say that this is a framework discovered in 1959, but just revitalized in the 1990s. And this became kind of a standard framework adopted in personality and arguably is influential in the forward progress in our thinking about the important components of jobs and school. Due to the Big Five setting a standard. Setting standards creates progress. This is a standard. And so there have been a number of attempts to go beyond the Big Five, and I'm going to explain that here. Excuse me, let's see here. This is based on literature review. So the question is, can this framework be stretched far enough to characterize what we want when we look at students, when we look at people in the workforce? So these are the facets. E, that's extroversion, 3 facets, influencing, outgoing, and adventurous. By facet, I mean these are slightly different aspects. And so if we ask people whether they're assertive, whether they're direct, whether they take charge, those will be very highly correlated. If we ask them whether they're sociable, that'll be somewhat correlated with assertive, but not as highly as direct would be. So there's kind of clusters of terms, descriptors. And so sociable is another one, and then loud, entertaining, and attract social attention is another category. Agreeableness, considerateness, generosity, cooperativeness. Conscientiousness, so this is typically the one that's most highly correlated with success. And that includes determined, organized, self-regulated, rule-following, honest, and dependable. Neuroticism or emotional stability includes stress tolerance, calmness, positive outlook, and then openness includes intellectual curiosity or orientation, creativity, open-mindedness, introspective, artistic. And so this is this potentially could be a framework. In fact, I think OECD is really looking at this as a framework for this longitudinal K-12 study that I mentioned earlier. We brought two of the Big Five factors into PISA 2012, and they're still in PISA 2015, openness and conscientiousness for the first time. And you could say that the questionnaire includes a lot of the other elements as well. So this is potentially a unifying framework. Any quick questions before I talk about methods? Clarifying questions?
Was it studied only in the USA or in other countries? It seems that it's very much related to
The Big Five is pretty international, I would say. The typical study is based on dictionary definitions, so you start from the ground up rather than translating the English version to another language. But it's pretty robust across countries. There's some problems with it we can talk about, but those dimensions are pretty robust across countries. Oh, yes.
Employers and those who look at the needs of the future market or workforce take for granted that they get graduates who have science, mathematics, and language skills.
Right.
Let's assume that the next generation schools will focus only on the non-cognitive skills.
Right.
Because the idea, I think, would be to have both. So how?
The idea is to have both, absolutely right. I mean, in fact, we know from some work by Greg Duncan that one of the best determinants of subsequent behavior in school and the workforce is your mathematics scores. In kindergarten, it's a very high predictor in the 0.60s between kindergarten and fifth grade. And fifth grade to employment is a very high prediction in the 60s. So yeah, absolutely, it's very important, these skills.
Do we have any idea? You mentioned before something and you put them together about teaching and educating. What do schools do? So what do schools do in the, and you gave some examples, they teach you to come on time to a lesson. That's not a lesson, that's a behavioral aspect. So this is where we're going to now in your lecture?
Yeah, no, I'm going to focus on the assessment per se. Schools are doing all kinds of things. There are a lot of experiments going on all around the world. The Durlock meta-analyses is a good place to start. They cover school programs and also after-school programs, 2 meta-analyses. DURLAK. It's a very, very comprehensive review. Okay, so I wanted to talk about some methods very quickly here. Starting with the self-ratings. These are the typical self-rating assessments. I usually make a noticeable contribution to group problem-solving tasks. Strongly agree, disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. Has anyone seen this kind of item before? They're everywhere. There's no end to them. I apologize a lot. I amuse my friends, etc. Okay. And we use it, in fact, in the Success Navigator. Simple self-assessments, and they work very well. They work very well within a country, and they work very well when the stakes are low. If the stakes are high, they don't work so well because they're easy to fake. And so they also have these response bias problems. Social desirability, that is wanting to look good, reference group bias, response style bias, extreme responses. Let's see, someone was showing something, who had the graph this morning about Malaysia? They had some data from Malaysia, OECD. Deborah, yeah, where's Deborah? Oh yeah. So Malaysia, what we know is they say yes to everything, right? And so I was wondering, so there's this issue, of these there's huge response style effects. And so we have a couple methods now for dealing with that. One is forced choice. And forced choice, all you do is you take a rating scale and you turn it into I keep my promises, strongly disagree to strongly agree, and you change that into for each pair of statements, please click on the one that is most like you. I keep my promises, or I'm generally pretty forgiving. This is multidimensional forced choice. Very powerful method. And here's some others. And you can think of these. I think of others first versus I am generally prepared. What is more true of you? So we now have methods to pair these statements together. First, these forced choice show higher validities compared to single statements. We showed that in PISA 2012. I won't have enough time to show examples, but and then Bartram showed that across lots of different scales at a national level. The meta-analysis finding is that for forced choice, the correlation is 40. For single statements, the correlation is 0.24. That's our best today, our best meta-analytic estimate of the difference between forced choice and single statements. There's huge advantages to forced choice. Better cross-country comparability, which we found in PISA 2012. Okay, and we now have item response theory formats. There are some problems with forced choice, but the item response theory formats that we have for dealing with that now have pretty much solved those problems. And we have a couple of very good item response theory models, one by Anna Brown and Albert Maidu Olivares, and one by Steve Stark, Fritz Drasko, and Sasha Chernishenko. Both of them basically solve the problem that we used to have with forced choice. Here's one, we're testing this right now today in Yale School of Management. I'm just showing you one screenshot from the test. I find it difficult to create new things versus I have had many setbacks and disappointments in my life and never seemed to catch a break. I know that's idiomatic language, but you know, at Yale School of Management, they all speak pretty good English. What's that? The right answer, yes. What's the right answer? There is no right answer. Yeah. Yeah, it's just predictors of different things, different outcomes. Okay, anchoring vignettes is another one I just wanted to mention very briefly. Based on some work, Gary King at Harvard. They're used widely, and we introduced those in PISA 2012, and they solved this thing called the attitude paradox. The attitude paradox was that the countries that had the best attitudes had the worst achievement. The countries with the worst attitudes had the best achievement. For example, Singapore, Hong Kong students hate school. They think mathematics is unimportant. They don't like their teacher, but they have the highest achievement in the world. And then we have the other case, the attitude achievement, paradox. And basically, we saw that as a response-style effect problem that we solved. This is a Big Five version of it. This is not one we did in PISA. This is one we're using in another study in the U.S. But basically, what happens, the way this works is that you have 3 vignettes, 3 exemplars, and you rate each of these 3 vignettes with respect to some trait. Okay? And the vignettes are designed to be low, medium, and high, roughly. And then you rate yourself. I work hard, I keep lists, etc. Okay? And so what you do then is you basically use how you scale the vignette, or how you rate the vignettes, to rescale your own ratings. Okay? I won't have time to explain all the details, but that's the basic idea. So some people rate the vignettes high, and they rate themselves in the middle, and for them, they're rating themselves low because those are the standard vignettes. Other people rate themselves in the middle, but they rate all the vignettes low, so they're rating themselves relatively high. So it's relative to the vignettes, and so there's methods for figuring that out, and they work. I mean, that's the bottom line, is that they work. They're successful. So we've developed them for Big Five, emotional intelligence. Here we go again. All kinds of things, and they work especially well on personality type scales, and they work really well on cross-country procedures, Deborah. So my suggestion is next time you collect those data, stick some anchoring vignettes in there and see if the Malaysians still are on the far left of the scale. I can't remember what that scale was. Okay. No, you can't use them high stakes. They're easy to game. All you have to do is you rate all the vignettes low and you high. And then you come out like Superman, right? So they're, well, I mean, you can explain it. I just explained it in one sentence. So the trick. So it's, I mean, if you'd never use those to select people for a job, for example. But you can certainly use it in something like PISA. In fact, how they rate the vignettes is a very good diagnostic over whether they're actually paying attention to the assessment. And it turns out a lot of people aren't. And it correlates with their achievement score. So you wonder how much of achievement is due to motivation. And the vignettes are kind of a nice test of that. The answer is a lot. Okay, others ratings, they're good predictors. They are, and we've tried these a lot. Others ratings, there's good data that show that ratings by someone else are better than self-ratings. For a couple of reasons. One is that there's not an obvious motivation for the other person to rate you highly. But the other is that you don't have a good standard for yourself. It's like, you've listened to the tape recorder of your voice, right? And you say, who's that person? It's not me at all. You don't have a good standard. So whereas other people, so when you do the ratings, when a teacher rates the class, there's a nice distribution of whatever trait they're rating. When you're rating yourself, you don't have that same objective view of things. So that's why others' ratings tend to have better reliability, better predictive validity. The problem is that when you're using them, a couple of problems. One is that you need to bother someone else. And so this is a problem. We try to do this for graduate school. And we got this complaint. We don't want to bother someone else to fill this thing out. And they don't want to be bothered. You don't like to be bothered when someone asks you to fill out something on your behalf. That's the big one, really. Okay, situational judgment. Many people have seen these kinds of things before. Here's an example. As part of a class project, you serve as a volunteer for a nonprofit in a discussion about how to find new volunteers. You bring up what you think is a great new idea, but the others tell you that the idea is off base, not workable. How would you handle this situation? And then this is a multiple choice. You choose what the best response is. So we've developed thousands and thousands of these situational judgment items. People like them. They look like something realistic. They're not ratings of whether you show up on time. In fact, you can measure whether people show up on time cast into a situational judgment, and people think that's a more authentic kind of assessment. The problem is that we can get your dependability, your punctuality in 6 or 7 questions, but it takes 30 or 40 minutes of situational judgment items to get that same score at the same level of reliability. So they're kind of slow in terms of they're expensive to develop. So that's what all these bullet points say. Okay, biodata. We did this experiment at Catholic University in Santiago. Veronica Santalices and some other folks, and then there was another study with Fred Oswald, with College Board. There was a lot of interest in this idea of capturing what you've done as part of a college admissions process. This has great potential. It's never really worked very well for some reason. But we continue to believe in it, and we're still trying it. Larry Stricker had one at ETS, the documented accomplishments. And so there's a lot of this over the years. I still believe it. I think we just haven't figured out what the right questions are, how to word them. Maybe we can use some anchoring vignettes and some forced choice and get it finally to work. I just want to mention two areas. One is the idea of idea generation. The other is the idea of collaborative problem solving. Here's the idea generation. Actually, it goes back to some work that Randy Bennett did at ETS 10, 15 years ago. So this is a study. We're currently pilot testing this kind of item as a new test for the GRE. The GRE, how many people know what the GRE is? It's a test you take to get into graduate school in the United States as math, quantitative, verbal, and analytic writing. And this would be number 4. This would be a kind of idea production type of task. So what would the consequences be if all required physical labor was done by robots instead of humans? You get 2 minutes to type in as many things as you can do. So we collected data on about 1,000 GRE type people. And here's just what two people said during that time. By the way, it's 2 minutes, and they only came up with 4. This guy came up with 6. This guy came up with 4 answers. And that's actually on the high side. Some people can only think of 1 or 2 things. It's amazing. And here's what they said. Humans would become fat from not working. Humans would evolve in a different way. Unemployment would be increased dramatically. Humans would become dependent on robots. The other person said humans would be out of jobs involving labor would with more predictability and so forth. So this is just a flavor of what this kind of data looks like. And what we're trying to do is automatically score this with machine scoring. And basically the rule is anything on topic and non-redundant. And so we have to figure out how to credit a response for being on topic and non-redundant. That's it. There's not much more that, there's a lot of other things that you can do, but those two factors are very good. Okay, so this is based on, again, a study by Mumford, Marks, Connolly, 1998, showed incremental validity over standardized test scores, and then again, Randy Bennett, Don Rock, Norm Frederickson, Bill Ward did studies, again, controlling for standardized tests. Now, what's significant about this? What's significant is that many, many, many kinds of tests have been tried in the context of something like the GRE. Just none of them show incremental validity. None of them show that they can predict beyond what's in the GRE already. This is one of the few examples where something did. Now, at this time this study was done, we didn't have the writing test. And so the writing might capture some of this, but we're going to give it a shot. We think that writing might not, there's a lot of other elements of writing, like good writing and so forth. And this just idea production might capture something that the writing doesn't. By the way, why didn't this, it was so great, why didn't it get implemented? It was too costly to score. That was the barrier. But now we have better technology. We can score this now. And so this is an example. Collaborative problem solving, just want to mention this, Anita Woolley and others did this study, and they basically found that teams perform differently from individuals. The abilities of the team members are not a real strong predictor of team output. That was the finding. What predicted team output was a process measure, turn taking. Females were better in a team. Well, half of you will not be surprised at all about that. And then an emotional intelligence. Actually, the mind's eye test was a significant predictor of output. Mashi doesn't believe that, but you know. Anyway, so we had a conference 2 weeks ago. You can look up Innovative Assessment of Collaboration 2014, ETS. It'll give you all the papers, and I think they're downloaded, they soon will be, or uploaded. They soon will be. A very interesting conference that focused on this collaboration idea. There's lots of interest in this. There's the conference, there's PETA 2015 has a kind of a version of collaborative, but it's not really a collaboration, it's a human agent collaboration. ATC 21S, they have a collaborative problem solving task that schools around the world are using. NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, is developing this collaboration. They're developing a white paper, actually, that'll be issued in 6 months. And there's a Collaborative Assessment Alliance, and again, GRE is actually conducting a second study. Besides the idea generation, they're also looking at possibilities of doing collaborative problem solving. Okay, so once you have the information, what do people want? Score reports. This is an example. We have many formats of this. This is a spider chart. We have lots of different charts. People want to know about themselves. They want to know about their strengths and weaknesses. So Yale students are very excited about these kind of reports. They want to know about their skills, their strengths and their weaknesses. And that's what this is designed to do, a snapshot of what your skills are. This is an institution report. So the Mission Skills Assessment I talked about earlier provides institution reports. So this is a distribution of scores for a number. Each row is an institution. In this case, it's a middle school, and so institutions are very interested in comparing themselves on these various dimensions with other, especially similar institutions. So that's the institution report application. So here are some uses. Again, we're doing Yale School of Management. We're currently using it in their leadership development program. That's kind of they take it when they first enter the business school at Yale. They get that, and then they get the feedback, like those score reports. And then working with a coach, they develop a plan for the next 2 years to improve, to capitalize on their strengths or to compensate for their weaknesses, or some kind of self-plan. However, the head of admissions, Bruce Delmonico, is interested. He said there's lots of interest in using this for admissions. How would they use it in admissions? I don't know. They would have these scores, and they would have their GRE scores or their GMAT scores, and then they would have their personality scores. And that would be part of their admission material. How would they use it? They don't know. They didn't know how they'd use the writing assessments when we first developed the writing assessments. Who knows how they're going to use it? Anyway, it's designed to be secure for high stakes use. That was what the forced choice was all about. It's very, very difficult for a variety of reasons. Very, very difficult to fake that. We're currently using it in employment screening. It's a test called Workforce Assessment for Job Fit. We have that in 18 languages. We're testing it, pilot testing around the world right now. And then I mentioned the student development, the low stakes student development application called Success Navigator. That's in 70 colleges in the US, and we're actually pilot testing in high schools as well. And that's used for city placement. We also, that's used for student development, but we're also testing it for placement. So roughly half the students in the United States do not go directly into a credit-bearing mathematics course when they enter college. They have to go to a developmental course, remedial course. Some people are amazed at that statistic. It wasn't always that way. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. It's part of an effort to promote higher educational attainment. More students are going into college. And so this is what so the idea here is that you could be below the cutoff line on your math score, but you could compensate if your character skill scores were high enough. That would compensate for being low on your math scores. Okay? So in other words, if you were a persevering, hardworking kind of person, the decision could be made to allow you to take a credit-bearing course, even though your math scores weren't up to the line of qualification. So that's an experiment. We'll see. Next year we'll know the answer. Also, the institution monitoring application I mentioned, we're in over 100 high schools and middle schools in the US. And then workforce monitoring, this is the OECD program called Education and Skills Online. Okay, so in summary, we know more or less what to measure. These character skills are as powerful or more powerful than IQ and achievement in predicting future success in education, the workforce, and life. And we have a number of promising frameworks that are useful today. National Research Council, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, Chicago Framework, and Big Five Framework. Those are all good. For high-stakes assessments, such as admissions, we really want to rely on something like forced choice assessments. Those are the most viable, we think. Others ratings are useful, but you have to convince another person to actually do them, and that's turned out, our observation, our experience has been that can be challenging to get people to rate other people. And there also is an issue of rater differences when you don't know who the raters are. For low stakes, self-assessments are useful as is, especially for student development, but anchoring vignettes are also useful supplements to self-assessments, especially in cross-cultural contexts. Culture where there's differences between groups, culture groups or subgroups. But what we're really looking forward to, what we're really putting our attention on is performance assessments, because in the end, ratings are just ratings. They're just things that we tell each other about ourselves. And what we really want is something like a test, like a math test, like a reading test. We want a non-cognitive or character skills test. And the collaborative problem solving and the situational judgments are along those lines. And we have ideas about remote situational interviews as well. So thank you very much.